Okay, I think we should get started. We are recording, just to let everybody know. So we will be posting this to our website later this week. I want to thank everyone for joining the Alachua County PTA tonight to talk about cyberbullying and digital media safety. I'm so happy to be joined by all of our speakers tonight and our counselors. I just want to do some introductions before we get started. I would like to introduce Mary Benedict. She is the president of our Alachua County Council of PTAs. Megan Hendricks, who is the vice president of the Alachua County PTA. And just to let you know, they're always here for you if you have any questions or concerns with regards to PTA or your child's education and advocating for your kids. I'm so happy to be joined tonight, who will be doing our talk, by Dr. Jennifer Doty and Dr. Joy Gabrielli. Dr. Jennifer Doty is an assistant professor at the University of Florida in the Department of Family, Youth, and Community Sciences. She focuses on engaging parents in the prevention of bullying and cyberbullying, because there are not a lot of bullying programs out there that have included parents or digital home environments. So she will be starting off our talk, and then Dr. Gabrielli will be talking about the digital safety aspect and youth risk behaviors. Dr. Gabrielli is an assistant professor as well at UF Health. She directs the youth in the department, of clinical and health psychology. She directs the Youth Risk and Resilience Lab at the University of Florida, and her research centers around identification of environmental risk factors for adolescent risk behavior. And I'm also happy to have Ms. Anholt and Ms. Nagaral join us from the Howard Bishop Middle School. They are both counselors there who counsel and take care of our kids every day. And they're here to answer questions. If anyone has specific questions with regards to schools, they can help us with that. So with that, my name is Pamela Korthowski, and I am the ESC chair for the Alachua PTA and also for the state of Florida with Florida PTA. And by doing this, we're celebrating and bringing awareness to October, which is National Prevention Bullying Month as well. And I ask everybody to wear orange on October 21st for Unity Day, where we will stomp out that bullying and address that. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Doty, who will start presenting her research findings.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can kind of follow the PowerPoint that we've prepared today. I just want to start out a little bit with my why. Like many of you, I am a parent. I have 3 kids. One of them is no longer a teenager, but for the last several years, I've had 3 teenagers at home. And all 3 of them have participated in theater. And one day I got a call after a performance from one of my kids who said, "Oh my gosh, after the performance, somebody approached me in the bathroom, shoved me up against a wall and said, 'Don't you ever do that again.'" And we believe that was some homophobic teasing. He got several texts over the next few days about, hey, you're gay for being in theater and all of this. And so that hit me in a way that really has shaped my research for the next several years. As a parent, I wanted to know, what can I do to make this, to help in the wake of bullying and to prevent it from happening again. And so that's become a major part of my research. So tonight we're going to cover not only cyberbullying, but a little bit more broadly online safety, and talking specifically about parenting in a digital age. So first I want to talk a little bit about hours on screens. This has probably changed dramatically. I wasn't able to find recent research since COVID-19 on the number of hours on screens, but this is 2019 data from Common Sense Media report that came out last year. And it shows us that even the younger kids, the ages 8 to 12, are spending several hours on screens. So about 6 hours of screens for these guys, and then all the other hours that are awake are listed in red, but this is the hours on screen is not including school or homework. So this is just, you know, scrolling, listening to music, watching YouTube videos, all of that they're doing online, playing little games. The kids who are age 13 to 18 are spending even more of their time, like 2/3 of their hours awake on screens. So that's a lot of time, and I strongly suspect that this has gone up in the last several months. So I have a little video that I think Claire and Kelsey, you guys will be able to relate to in the school environment. So you know what? Let me stop really quick and make sure that I am sharing so that you can hear my sound. All right.
Kid one thing, then today will be a success. Now class. Class, please pay attention.
Text uncle. Text uncle.
Children, why do you all need cell phones?
Safety.
Emergency.
Safety. Educational.
Could you at least set them to vibrate? That's it. Everything in the box. No more gizmos in this class. Okay, Edna.
All right, so kind of a humorous take, but we do know that cell phones are ubiquitous among youth and that they are disruptive to some of their learning and development. So what are the effects of screens? Most of us are here because we are worried about the mental health effects of screens or the effects of screens on danger behavior that's dangerous. And so I want to pause a moment though and say maybe it's not as bad as we think it is overall. I've come to think about screen time as a magnifier for whatever's going on among our youth. So if our young people are in a really good place socially and emotionally, then screen time might magnify that and be a boost socially and emotionally. But if they're in a really dark place, then the screen time can drag them down even further, in part because we know that algorithms are built into screens to give kids more of what they're looking for. And if they're looking for something dark because they're feeling dark, it will feed them more of that. So I've started thinking about this a lot as a magnifier for what's already existing. Longitudinal research shows a very small effect on depression. Whether that's meaningful or not is debated a little bit among the experts. But a lot of the research has shown no effects on anxiety, which goes counter to what we think of. There's a review recently that showed inconsistent effects. We do know, however, that there are some groups that this is worse for, that when there are negative effects, it tends to be more consistent for girls and for younger teens. So a lot of the research that Joy and I do are with younger teens, with middle school kids. And that's because they are more vulnerable and they're just starting to learn to use all of this technology and get on, I mean, probably they've been using iPads for years, but a lot of times their social media starts at around age 12. One experiment with college students did show that college students had a better mood after they stayed away from social media, but we don't know of anything that's been conducted with the younger kids to this point along those lines. So here's what teenagers themselves said. This is from the Pew Research Center in 2018. And there was actually about 31% of the kids that they interviewed said, or that they surveyed said that social media had mostly a positive effect. They liked to connect with family and friend and find news and meet other people. And it was largely a good thing in their lives. But there were 24% who said it had mostly a negative effect. It was, and bullying was the top reason for that. And then the harm of relationships, the lack of in-person contact. So you kind of see a split. And again, you can imagine if there's kids who are experiencing that positive, they go on screens for a lot of time, that will be magnified. The kids who are having mostly a negative effect, if they're going on screens a lot more, that will also be magnified. I wanted to share with you 3 studies that we're working on tonight. The first is just some breaking brand new research. These are preliminary results. And I think we can all take a deep breath and recognize that maybe some positives have come out of the pandemic. In terms of online safety, the blue line here represents wave 1 of this survey. And we asked about 300 students back in fall, so September through November, what their online safety behaviors were, what their online habits were. And they reported online safety that was fairly high. And then in the pandemic, you can see that it was slightly higher. The second wave of this data was collected in June, end of May, June of this year. And so it was right after the quarantine ended. And actually kids, and we haven't tested this to see if this is a significant difference, but it was at least the same, if not a little bit better. And then cyberbullying, we've been thinking, gosh, it's probably skyrocketed because of all of the time the kids are spending online. And if you look at the red bar, cyberbullying others has actually gone down. Relational cyberbullying looks like maybe it's ticked down. It might be the same when we run the statistics. And then cyber victimization has also gone down. And what's interesting about this is that we have colleagues in India who ran the same questions and they found the same effects. So that's actually a positive thing. We think that that might be because there's a lot of overlap between in-person bullying and cyberbullying at this age. And it seems like that in-person relationships drive the cyberbullying to some extent. However, we have a colleague that we were talking to just yesterday, and he has data with college students. And among the college students, the cyberbullying actually went up. So we don't have data on high school students. It would be interesting to see what happens there. We're going to be examining this a little bit more, but it may be, and we haven't crunched these numbers yet, but it may be that there's other risks that are happening, like the distraction that Claire and Kelsey were talking about in the classroom, that is disruptive in other ways to kids' development. So again, this hasn't been studied much because it's such a brand new thing, but these are the very first results, and they're actually good news rather than bad news. So I want to talk a little bit more about cyberbullying. And first, just ask the question, what is cyberbullying? And this is a big deal because the responses of the folks at school and the law officers, all of these depend on the definition of cyberbullying. So this is based on, let's see if I can advance here. This is based on a CDC definition of face-to-face bullying, except we add the caveat that it's all online. So this is aggressive behavior in an online setting where there's a power difference. So by that, we mean it could be a kid who's a little bit older. It could be a kid who is socially more popular. It could be a kid who's simply stronger in real life. And it's between peers, so it's not siblings, it's not dating relationships necessarily. It's repeated, it inflicts harm, and it's intentional. When researchers asked kids what part of this definition meant a lot to them, they talked about the aggressive behavior, the fact that it was between peers, and the fact that it inflicts harm. And so one of the things that's going on often with cyberbullying is that the people who are setting policy and following policy, so the teachers, the school administrators, the school counselors, are following an official definition, but kids themselves may not have that same working definition. And so that's something that we think about as researchers sometimes, is if it's real to the kids and it's having negative effects on them, then maybe we talk about cyber harassment and still try to address that. The other thing that I wanted to point out is the fact that face-to-face bullying has to be repeated over and over, but that's harder to figure out online because one single post could go viral. And we'll see an example of that in a little bit. And then, is that cyberbullying? Is it actually bullying, even though it was only one incident? A lot of researchers tend to think that it is because it gets passed around to so many kids. So some cyberbullying statistics. Nearly 2/3 of youth report getting cyberbullied online. Local school officers have told us that this is the #1 technological to get contacted about. And the challenge for the school resource officers is that cyberbullying isn't always considered a crime per se. And so the law can't always do much about it. And so what often happens is school resource officers really try to educate, but they can't do much about that. And so the schools actually end up handling a lot of the cyberbullying incidents because of that. The other challenge about cyberbullying is that kids don't tell their parents about cyberbullying. And we're not entirely sure why that is, but we suspect that kids do not want their social media and their devices taken away from them. So if cyberbullying does occur, what's the problem with that? The main problem is that we know that there's a lot of negative outcomes associated with cyberbullying behavior. We do know that there's academic problems, kids' grades suffer, there's more likely to be school truancy if kids are involved in cyberbullying. There's a higher risk for juvenile justice and adult criminal behavior. If kids have been bullying perpetrators down the road, those are long-term outcomes. Depression and anxiety in victims. And we know from the research that the depression and anxiety can be worse among kids who've been cyberbullied compared to kids who've just had face-to-face bullying incidents. Suicidality is related to cyberbullying, and poor social outcomes for all kids involved in cyberbullying. So those are some reasons why we believe it's important to be addressing this. I do want to say, as we start to get into some more of the research of local folks in our own community who have talked with us over the last couple of years, that our first gut reaction as parents is to figure out how to monitor what kids are doing and limit and control what they have access to online. And what we've found in the research is that monitoring really has mixed results. That restriction can be harmful to kids because they don't learn how to deal with some of the problems online on their own. And it can also cause kids to kind of go underground. I don't know about you, but my kids are always about 10 steps ahead of me technologically speaking. And it's really easy for them to try to hide things from me or get around controls and things like that. So Joy is going to talk about that a little bit more, but I wanted to emphasize that parent-child relationships are the best protection we have from harmful effects, whether that's cyberbullying or online dangers, online things that we're worried about. So here are just 2 suggestions for strengthening parent-child relationships. And then we'll share with you what parents in our own community have said to us about preventing cyberbullying. One suggestion is to plan an activity every week with your kids, and with your kids individually. And it doesn't have to be an expensive activity. It doesn't have to be a lengthy activity, but that one-on-one time could build the relationship. And that's what we need to strengthen protection when things do happen online. The other thing is to aim to communicate 4 positives for every negative thing that our kid does. It's our brains scan for negative behaviors. We tend to notice when the chores aren't done. We tend to notice when there's a late assignment. We are constantly scanning for those negatives, but we sometimes as parents don't take the time to point out the positives. When we do, it strengthens our relationship. And because our brains are constantly scanning for negatives, we almost need 4 or 5 positives for every 1 negative because they weigh less in our brain. All right. So we had a chance to talk to 26 parents in Alachua and Levy County about 18 months ago. And these were parents of kids who were going into middle school or in middle school. 88% were mothers, 69% had a 4-year degree, and 31% lived in rural areas. And here's some of the things they told us. First, parents really talked about the prevention of bullying, cyberbullying, and how important communication was. Over and over again, they said communication was critical. And one of the things they talked about communicating was perspective taking, teaching their kids to put themselves in somebody else's shoes. So one of the parents said, I think analogies help. Like if you're home and someone knocked on your door, their face was concealed and you didn't even know their name, you didn't even know their gender or sex, would you open the door and invite them into your home? Because that's what we're doing when we participate in conversations online with people we don't know anything about. So here it was kind of putting yourself in the shoes of thinking about danger and thinking about putting this in an in-person perspective. The second one said, I'm helping my kids the most by providing them with perspective and context so that they have a bigger picture view of their lives, their role among their parents, and all of that. I don't think it's natural until you get older. So this parent was trying to help their kids to get that bigger picture. And then parents also talked about monitoring. And so here's what they had to say about that. And they did it through talking. And Joy will talk a little bit more about how important this conversation is about monitoring rather than just controlling. But one parent said, talking is kind of our training wheels into learning how to connect with other people beyond face-to-face. I get to monitor at this point who he talks to. That's why I talk so much about trust with him, because at some point, I'm not going to be able to monitor very much anymore. I'm going to have to trust that he's making good decisions. And then another parent said, she doesn't have any social media. She wanted Snapchat, which I finally put on my phone just for her to play the games, but it's on my phone and it's monitored. For me, cyberbullying is a concern. And some of these parents were also telling us that this was very age dependent. This was a parent who had a younger child. And so more monitoring seemed to be more important to them at younger ages. One thing parents didn't tell us much about was, what do you do once cyberbullying happens? So we pulled some expert advice together, and here are some of the things that the experts say. 1, communicate directly that you want the cyberbullying to stop. 2, explain the importance to your child of contacting the school authorities so that they can be aware of what's going on. Another one, potentially contacting the other child's parent. That really depends on your relationship with them, and deciding on a course of action together. Another piece was saving the evidence, taking a screenshot, for example. And in Florida, we do have bullying laws that include cyberbullying, but like I mentioned earlier, most of the time it's the school who are the ones who give the consequences. So we did have a chance to talk to local school counselors about preventing cyberbullying about a little over a year ago. And in 15 interviews with 17 local school counselors in Alachua and Levy, we had some interesting conversations. What the school counselors emphasized was collaborating more with parents, collaborating and getting support from administration. They emphasized the importance of connecting with parents early. One said, I'd like to do more with parents, be that source of information for them, be able to organize events for them or organize a school newsletter. As a school counselor, I want to be able to share more information with them than I have been. Other counselors said, we'd like to share more information, but parents are so busy. Will they show up? Another school counselor said, we have policies about it, but we don't go into depth necessarily. We go into depth when the parents come and talk to us about any of these situations or if they have questions. So there's a lot of like in-depth policy on the website, but it's not always something that's front and center for busy parents. And then the counselors also talked about the importance of supporting when cyberbullying occurs. They wanted parents to know the reality of cyberbullying. And this is an example of how quickly cyberbullying can spread. One student took a picture of herself in a bathing suit at a friend's house and put it on Snapchat. And another student saw it and took a screenshot of it and made a comment about her physical appearance. It kept escalating and escalating and escalating. It was over like a spring break. By the time the student got to school, there were about 2/3 of the student body who had seen it. And then the other thing that the school counselors talked about is just the importance of being really collaborative and letting parents know that they're on their side. So this counselor said, most of my conversations with parents are over the phone, but I just try to really make it seem like, hey, I'm here for your child. I'm here for everybody here, and this is what I think could really help. So school counselors also told us there are some challenges. One is that parents don't always read or know what the policy is, and here I'm guilty. I actually hadn't read the school policy until I was preparing for this talk. But it does include the definition of cyberbullying with bullying. It includes some of the definitional pieces that we talked about earlier. And there's a helpline to report cyberbullying and an anonymous email to report cyberbullying, which I had seen that part on the email on the school website before. So here we're going to pause before turning the time over to Joy and just see if anyone has questions, because we do have a couple of school counselors on the call with us, and just take one or two questions if anyone has them before Joy shares her in-depth knowledge about parenting in online spaces.
So if anybody has questions, please, you can unmute yourself and ask questions, or if Ms. Nagarl or Ms. Anhalt has any comments, go ahead. We don't have any questions in the chat right now.
Okay. So we can
curious.
Oh, go ahead.
So I was kind of curious if the cyberbullying occurs, say, on a weekend outside of school, what grounds does the school or the counselors have in that case? Does it have to occur during school hours or?
No, it doesn't have to occur during school hours. We have very specific language that says that if it impacts the school learning environment, that's when we can get involved. So if something happens over the weekend, whether like even with that example with spring break, if something happens over spring break and then it impacts that student's learning environment, or it impacts the school as a whole, then that is within our area to go ahead and look into and get involved with.
Thank
And
you.
we see that a lot. A lot of the cyberbullying does occur outside of school. I mean, realistically, they're spending more time on their phones on the weekends or after school, and we hear about it the next day.
Yeah, we sort of have these Cyber Monday events, it seems, where something that occurs over the weekend will spill over into the school day. And it's very difficult to track. And and kids are to the point, they're very savvy too. And if they're proactive about it, they will screenshot and they will come in and they will bring us. I mean, I've had kids email me screenshots of conversations. And so I'm not necessarily encouraging that, but it definitely makes that the kids are paying attention to how to document things.
Right. I think it is a really good idea to, because a lot of times, like, for example, we have kids being added to group chats where like mean things are being said. So we tell them, you know, just take a screenshot of that and then remove yourself from it. Like, don't engage in it, remove yourself from it. But it is important to make sure that you are, you know, documenting it somehow and letting an adult know.
Thanks. We'll save some time at the end for some more questions, but I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again so that Joy can
Great, thanks. My name is Joy Gabrielli. I'm a clinical child psychologist. My personal connection with this is I've seen it play out negatively for a lot of kids in my immediate personal circles. And I have the task, I think, at times of managing the very extreme scenarios where kids have had some pretty negative outcomes as a result of cyberbullying and maybe have mental health impacts or have had suicidality related to events that have happened. So I see the kind of extreme worst cases, I think, of negative outcomes that can happen from these types of experiences in my clinical practice. So all of that led to an interest in media parenting more broadly, and my approach to media parenting has been pretty global. I had the great fortune of bumping into Jen at UF and learning more about cyberbullying. That actually isn't my area of specialty. It's more in prevention of health risk behaviors more globally and mental health issues more globally. But I've come to realize how important media is in the lives of today's children. And I won't belabor this point because Jen already covered it really thoroughly. We have just seen a dramatic proliferation of access to personalized media devices and influence from media and technology in the lives of kids. And I think it has left us, a lot of us, in a space of not really knowing fully what to do as parents or as interventionists or clinicians. So we know media matters. We know that its influence is growing. We know that its access is growing. And it has these potential positive outcomes as well as the potential negative outcomes. And what we've come to learn is that a lot of the same parenting practices that are evidence-based from prior literature, just in terms of generally good parenting, are directly applicable to the media environment as well. So things like utilizing effective discipline, monitoring, using problem-solving practices, positive parenting, and positive reinforcement. So we can go on to the next slide. I think we have times where we might feel a little bit overwhelmed by how much media and technology is out there and how heavily invested our young people are. And we might get a sense of, oh gosh, should we just give up? But I actually want to share the positive advice that we actually can make a difference as interventionists and as parents. So some of the research that I was involved in before coming to UF identified that even just one rule, just parental R movie restriction, can significantly reduce youth risk for drinking, smoking cigarettes, and using marijuana. The practice of actively talking with your child about risks in the media can reduce their same risk for those behaviors. And we've done a lot of focus groups directly with kids across age spans. And what we've learned is that As kids age, they actually wish, they look back on their younger childhood and wish that their parents had been more involved. That was a big surprise finding that we had in some of our focus groups. They look back and say, gosh, I wish my parents had been more involved in guiding me in this process, helping me develop my own online identity in a healthy way. And so all of this evidence kind of came together into this model, this acronym of tech parenting. We tried to make it easy for people to remember the behaviors that can be helpful. And so it's this research-based recommendations that we have for managing media and technology in the home. And so tech represents these 4 primary behaviors that parents can engage in. T stands for talk, E stands for educate, C stands for co-use, co-view actively, and then H stands for implement house rules around media and technology use. So we're going to talk about each one of these briefly. So we can go on to the next slide. The first one, T, is talking with your kids about media technology and what they're experiencing online. This is about how they use media. It's about what apps they have access to. And it's also about who are you engaging with? Because kids are sometimes making relationship with people that they've never even met in the built environment. And so that's really helpful for parents to know. So I'm going to give you a few example conversation topics, some starters that you can use on the next slide with your kids as you start these conversations. So it can be something as simple as, you know, what did you like best about that TV show you just watched? Or what did you like least about the show? What kind of risk behaviors did you notice in the show? Did you notice any of these problematic behaviors? Or what were the characters doing in their relationships within the show? And then you can also find out, you know, how are they engaging socially with their friends around media and technology? So what do you like to watch when you're at your friend's house? Or what do you and your friends play in terms of video games when you're at their house? So I want to give you an example. We did a behavioral observation study with parents and kids, and we actually showed them some TV clips. We asked them to have conversations around those TV clips, and then we interviewed each of the dyads separately so we could learn about how they were interacting around media and technology use. And this is just an example of a conversation that we saw between a mom and her child in the study. So we showed them these clips. They all had risk behaviors in them. So they had things like violence or bullying or substance use. And the shows ranged quite a bit in terms of maturity level. So parents and kids were allowed to select shows, and parents actually selected a lot of mature rated shows with their younger kids, which was surprising in and of itself. And then we prompted them to talk with their kids about what they had seen in the show. And what we learned is that some parents were really good at talking with their kids about media and tech. Some parents really struggled. So here's an example. So this mom says, what did you notice for problematic stuff in the show? And by the way, all the shows had problematic stuff in them. And the kid says, oh, I don't know, nothing really. And the mom says, really? And the kid says, really? And then the mom says, really? And the kid says, yeah, really. And then the mom says, what about when that one guy punched that other guy in the face? And the kid says, oh yeah, I guess that was violence. And then what about when that other guy blew up that other guy's house and destroyed all of his stuff? Oh yeah, that too. And what about when he steamrolled over that guy and smushed him? That was violence? Yeah, mom says, that was violence. Oh, says the kid. And then the mom says, oh boy, I guess we have a lot to talk about. And the kid gets upset. So this is an example of just, this family hadn't had these conversations before. They had either just watched media together, maybe they watched media really separately, but it was kind of an awkward new thing for them to have a conversation around what they were watching. And in just this very simple task, with one simple question, this mom learned what her child did and did not understand about what they were viewing in the media. And we see the same thing with these social interactions. Some kids don't understand what they're doing in their social interactions online and in social media. Sometimes they don't realize that when you write in all caps, it sounds like you're yelling, or sharing that picture might actually cause a lot of harm to that other child. And so we have the responsibility as parents to be educating our kids on these things. We can go to the next slide. The next thing is the E, so educating your child about risks in the media, as well as educating them about what is appropriate behavior in the media. It's the same thing as, you know, we educate our children how to be polite at dinner. We educate our children in how to have, you know, positive and healthy relationships in the built world. We also want to be educating them about how to engage in the social world, in the social media world, in the online world. So we can go on to the next slide. So some conversation topics that we might have here is, wow, that movie showed a lot of drinking, but nobody got sick. Do you think that's very realistic? Because the media portrays a lot of behaviors in a very unrealistic way. And the media also portrays a lot of interactions and social behaviors with zero social consequences. So what kids are seeing online and in the media isn't necessarily how life will play out in the real world. In alcohol commercials, they often show people having a lot of fun, but they never show the negative effects of drinking. I noticed your comment on Sarah's Facebook page. It didn't seem very nice. How do you think that made her feel? What might you do to be able to correct that? So if we can approach our children in a way that's positive and warm and open-ended, non-judgmental, these can be teachable moments for them in these different environments. Were you going to say something, Jen?
No.
Oh, okay. And then C stands for co-viewing and co-using media with your child. So here, I have an example. You can go on to the next slide. So let's say we're watching a TV show with our kids, and we have this example in our behavioral observation study. We showed them various clips. Some of the clips were like The Simpsons. And so in the gray boxes are these different bits of the show and what was in the show content. And then the black bullet points are sort of what happened in the parent-child interaction. And then the red demonstrates what that actually might be doing in that interaction between parent and child. So in the show content, the Simpson teacher shows up drunk during the class. And The Simpsons is a funny show. Most people will laugh at a lot of the content in that show. So in our observation study, parents did laugh at that scene. And what that might be doing in that interaction is it might be an endorsement of that behavior to the child. They don't understand what the parent's laughing at, but they're seeing it happen in front of them. Then the teacher leads the class drunkenly down the hallway and the parent laughs more. Then the child's kind of looking at their parent like, what are you laughing at? And this can be social norming of the behavior. And then the teacher falls down drunk in the class. And so the child looks back and laughs because falling down is funny to most kids. The parent and child look at each other and laugh together. So then there's this sort of like shared enjoyment around this problematic behavior, which can lead to things like deviancy training. So you can advance once more, Jen, because I want to show an opportunity here for education. So we can make mistakes as parents. We can laugh at stuff and then realize, oops, I probably shouldn't have laughed at that. So we could have said, I know I just laughed, but actually this kind of behavior would get a teacher in big trouble. They'd get fired. And then at the next level, maybe we should probably turn this off. Now I'm realizing that this show content probably isn't as appropriate for you. And then we don't even have the issue where we're training them in problematic behaviors because we've just showed them, you know what, this content isn't appropriate for your age. And we can have the same type of experience if we're co-using social media with our kids. We can help them learn what's appropriate to do, how to interact with their peers, how to disengage from peers when people are interacting in a negative way. The H stands for house rules for appropriate media use. So we can go ahead and advance forward here. So what we learned is that in our focus groups, we learned, and our dyadic study, we learned that parents and kids say, yes, we have house rules generally on media and tech use and how kids are supposed to behave. But parents believe that they're being very clear in their rule setting. Kids will describe parent rules as being very vague. So parents will say, I want you to be appropriate online. And so a lot of kids don't know what that means. A lot of kids don't know, okay, so does that mean I, can look at this inappropriate thing but not comment on it? Does it mean that I can say this type of comment that's a little bit mean, but as long as it's not sexual in nature, it's okay? So what we recommend for parents is that parents have really clear and well-established house rules around both how youth access media, where they access media, and when they access media, and then also what they're doing on media. So one of the things that we present to parents is just the ABCs of youth tech access. A lot of parents ask us questions about, at what age should my child use this? When should my child be using that? And so we've learned from prior research that it's really difficult to set a clear age restriction, and most parents have a lot of variability in that anyway. And that can be influenced by the number of kids in the home, if there's older siblings, how many tech devices are in the home. So we provide a little bit more general guidance of, technology access should be age appropriate. So if you cannot monitor it, that is something that probably should be considered in how old your child is when they have access to something like a smartphone or their own iPad or their computer in their bedroom. We recommend that families balance how much tech is being used with other things in life. So kids need to develop social skills online. They also need to develop social skills in the built world, in their interactions with their friends in the day-to-day. And then media and tech should be content restricted. So we should not be allowing our kids, especially our younger kids, to have access to mature media content. That is an area where we can restrict, and we know that that will result in primarily positive outcomes. We can go on to the next slide. So some tips on how we select different kinds of media with our kids. We know generally that when parents have really clear rules around where, when, and how media can be used, there's a lot less negotiating that happens in the parent-child relationship. So when kids know that there's a clear set boundary, they're not pushing on that boundary as much. We've seen in our dyadic study that parents tend to select more mature media content than kids really should have access to. So we point parents to resources like Common Sense Media, which also offers a lot of guides for parents on what kind of apps are out there, if apps are age appropriate, which social media apps kids can access that will enable them to hide different interactions that they're having, or like Snapchat where the pictures delete over time. So that kind of resource can be helpful for parents to know, oh, is this app going to be appropriate for my child? Very few kids seem aware about content ratings, things like TV ratings, movie ratings, app ratings, video game ratings. So we can encourage families to have conversations around, what is age appropriate, how ratings work. And I found in my own interactions with my own child, as well as in communication with families that I work with in clinic, that when you point to something external, like, well, what does Common Sense Media have to say about if this is age appropriate? Usually the fight in terms of, but Susie has it in my class, why can't I have it? Usually those fights reduce when you have something external kind of guiding that decision-making process. And then the American Academy of Pediatrics has this really neat home media plan that talks you through all these different locations and devices that can guide some of those house rules to help parents navigate, where should I set more restriction or less restriction, or where do we need to have more conversation around what should be allowed and what isn't allowed. And I often encourage parents, this is a little bit mixed in the literature in terms of how effective tech monitoring is. And I think that's probably because parents are not very effective at tech monitoring. But as much as you can use technology to help you, you can use different apps to monitor what your kids are doing on their smartphones. You can actually set your internet to shut off at a certain time of night so that kids aren't, a lot of the most problematic behaviors happen well after bedtime when kids are accessing their smartphones in the middle of the night. So we want to encourage some limits around those things so that kids can be in a position to make healthier choices for themselves. We can go on to the next slide. So a few examples for ways that parents can use technology to monitor. A really basic one that's been around forever that very few people use is the V-chip device in televisions. You can set content restrictions very easily using that. There's now products out there, like Disney developed a Circle device that can help monitor internet in the home across several different devices. And then there's all sorts of different apps that you can download or programs that you can download. I don't like the fact that they talk about it like spying. I really encourage parents to be open with their kids about, we don't want to be secretive. If we're monitoring, kids should know we're monitoring, and we can have regular conversations with them about that monitoring. But it's easier to have a really fully developed structure early on around your kids that you then peel off kind of like scaffolding, so that we're not trying to react after a bad thing happens and then build up structure after a bad thing's happened, but we preventatively approach their safety. And then as they demonstrate competence and the ability to make good decisions for themselves, we can peel away some of those structures, some of that monitoring in a way that's age appropriate, developmentally appropriate. And you know, this is a funny thing, but my recommendation generally is that folks turn off location tracking on kids' phones. Police feel differently about that. So I do think, though, there's dangers involved with things like, there's programs like Snapchat and things like that, where people can find your location and can contact you just because you're nearby. And so kids need to be aware of, you know, what information is being taken from them through their smartphone devices. When you sign off, when you download an app, you get a whole list of things that that app is going to be tracking. So all their digital information is being stored somewhere. And your location can be found by people very easily through a lot of these apps. So parents find that comforting, but I find it a little bit uncomfortable that strangers can access your kid's location whenever they want to. All right, so we can go on to the next thing. Just some closing thoughts for folks to consider. Media and technology are growing in their influence on our kids, and we are the gatekeepers as parents. We have this wonderful opportunity to guide our kids in ways to develop healthy online identities. One thing we're learning from our research is that kids have two tasks now that they didn't used to have before. They used to have just the task of building an identity in the built world. Like, what you see is what you get. Now they have the task of building an identity in the built world and building an identity in the online world. And actually those two identities can be very different, and they can hide their online identity from parents. So we want to help kids develop online identities that are congruent with their built world identities. So they're kind, they're gentle, they're considerate in both environments. And we want them to develop identities that are protected and safe, and can be supported by you as their parent. So we encourage parents to talk to kids about media and tech like it's a social influence, like The Simpsons. If The Simpsons were your kids' friends, is that an influence, a social influence you want in your kids' lives every day? A lot of parents have told us that in today's world, they use media and technology to get things done in the household. I understand that, I can relate to that, but we have to be cautious about using them fully as babysitters, because they are not investing, media and technology do not have the task of investing positively in your child. So we want to think about what kind of media and tech our kids are using and how we're using it as parents. We should think about media and technology as social vehicles for children. This is wonderful because they can access friends, especially with COVID. They can access people in their lives that maybe they weren't able to access before. They can Skype with family that's far away. If they have, you know, a rare disease or something, they can connect with other kids who have that same rare disease. That's a beautiful thing. And so we want to encourage kids to use devices to enhance their social activities, to promote positivity in their social activities. But we also need to be gatekeepers around that. And we just like we wouldn't send kids into a locked room that we don't have any access to, that we don't have keys to, we shouldn't be sending them off into their smartphone world without having access to their passwords, knowing who they're contacting in there, and knowing what technology is teaching them. And then just to close, like Jen said earlier, we don't believe that all technology is all bad. There's been a lot of beautiful things, a lot of integration of learning environments where kids can access amazing information online. They can learn in more effective ways, and they can learn about safety and about positive relationships, and can get emotional support through media and technology. We have to help push our children in the direction of more positive, healthy social interactions online as a way of kind of redirecting them away from those more negative, problematic interactions. That's pretty much it in terms of the media parenting stuff. Happy to field any questions more specifically around those recommendations or around the research that we described. But thank you again for inviting us to participate with your group. It's just a nice opportunity to be able to kind of share some of our ideas and also learn from you all about ways that we can improve this information for families.
I'm just going to note here while our emails are up on the screen, we do have a newsletter that goes out every quarter to parents that cites some of the current projects and recent research on some of these topics. And so if you're interested in learning more, feel free to shoot us an email, and we can, I'm the one who collects those. And so you can shoot me an email and I'd be happy to add you to our newsletter, our quarterly newsletter. Questions that anybody has?
I had a question with regards to like our kids. So, well, it's a parent-kid question, and this is something that has come up a lot recently, and I'm going to just throw it out there. So, since we have had this pandemic and a lot of political issues that are going on as well, I'm noticing that grown adults are having a problem with social media and how they interact on social media. And I know that these grown adults, which are us, right, and our friends, have children that they're parenting. And I feel like if we don't know what the rules are, if the adult doesn't know what the rules are, then how are we supposed to teach our children those rules? And I feel that our children have grown up with social media and phones and technology, and we haven't. Like, we had to learn how to use all of this as well. So I know that parents are afraid of technology, some parents, and they don't even know how to use it properly. So I don't know if you have any comments or where, to help parents. I guess it's a parenting issue that we are seeing right now, when I see kids doing things that I question, and then I realize the parents are doing the same thing.
So,
I was just going to say, there's a great little book called Kindness Wins that I think teaches that principle of kindness online and consciously asks parents to practice kindness and point out how to be kind online. And I often recommend that. Joy, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I struggle with that issue myself because I have a very divided social community in social media. And one of the tricks, I think, with social media is it's so immediate. You can see something and you can react to it instantly, and you don't get that automatic negative facial expression or that feedback loop that you get in person. So my initial reaction to how do we deal with that is we think about ourselves as models for our kids as much as we can, and we're going to make mistakes. I certainly have. And we can also share that to a degree with our kids. Like, wow, mommy just got really upset and posted something. Now she has to say sorry to all these 15 people because, she got upset at this and she didn't take her time to calm down before reacting. So these are like opportunities for that relationship that Jen was talking about, where we, approach this with humility and also connectedness with our kids, and owning when we mess up. And maybe other people are messing up on social media, and you can use that as an example for your kids. Like, you don't know these people, but look at this comment she made. That wasn't very thoughtful. And, you have to grade that to their developmental level and their cognitive capacity, obviously. But it's sort of a social experiment happening right now. And it can be like a positive learning experience for our kids if we engage them in it, I think. And maybe even talk through our process. Oh, I'm feeling these upset feelings, but I just need to wait before I react to this, or I might make a bad choice. If we can model some of that impulse control, I think that's a really good thing. families are in my opinion, families are overexposing their kids to current events right now. I do that too, so I'm guilty of that same thing. It's stressing our kids out. So I think there's a certain level of like, kids need to know, like that there's, you know, these really big national things going on, but we have to be thoughtful about how much like violence we're letting them see, how much we have to grade the level of information to their developmental capacity and their emotional capacity, and then be willing to provide the support to them to manage whatever their reactions are to that stuff. Because there's some scary stuff happening, you know, right now. And even in my own personal relationships, I wonder, gosh, how did we get here?
So another question too, because this has come up a lot too, when we're talking about media and being on our phones, and what example are parents setting for their children? Because now that a lot of people are working at home, you know, we're all in front of our computers, on our phones. People don't even put their phones down for dinner anymore. The other thing was about, so we don't ask, I don't know if parents ask for permission to post their kids' faces and pictures on Facebook, right? And this has come up in conversation, where we aren't asking our children to post their pictures on Facebook, and we are sharing as adults all this information out there about our own kids. And I don't know what is that teaching our children, but yet we're asking our kids in high school and middle school, well, make sure you're asking for permission to post your friend's picture online or whatever, because, you know, we don't know how that makes them feel. And I'm just asking this question too, or putting it out there, because this has come up with my adult friends and parents, that we're doing this, and what message is that sending our kids? So should we be having a conversation around that? Should we be asking them permission to post their graduation picture, our happiness and joy for them online? Or like, I don't know, what do you do in that situation, or what's the right or wrong thing to do? So
we have a friend, I'm going to put in a plug because there's three of us actually. Her name's Stacy Steinberg.
I was just about to say, I'm so glad. Yeah. Growing Up Shared.
Yep. She just published a book on this. She's done all sorts of public appearances. She's remarkable. She's a lawyer, and she talks about this concept called sharenting. And basically it's the idea of, you know, we might overshare information about our kids, and that it's not a bad idea to ask their permission, even at a very young age, to ask their permission about what we post and what we don't post. And she'll talk about, you know, all the risks involved, because, you know, photos can get skimmed off the internet and modified and all this stuff. She'd be another great person to have come and visit and talk, because she can talk about the legal side of a lot of things. And so it's an interesting dilemma that we have very little research on, almost none. There's like, I think 4 studies so far on the concept of sharenting. And we don't know the negative effects of that, to be honest. I don't think we can really speak to that, other than, like I said before, I think we're models to our kids. And so we're showing them how to behave, and they're going to replicate what we do more than what we tell them.
Correct. And what I was going to say is, I just in my own personal case, because I have a 22 and a 15, and when our older son was in high school, at some point we had a conversation about it, and I don't even remember where it started or what brought it up, but it was, well, why are you going to put that picture, you know, or why are you posting? And so anyway, a conversation ensued about it. So from then on, I just consulted and said, well, hey, can I, you know, it's your birthday, you know, can I put this picture, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that the example of perhaps having the conversation just to respect someone else's privacy, just that initial concept. I mean, it would be nice if parents did that, but like you said, everything is so immediate and in the moment. You know, they're at a sporting event and their kid does something and they just post a picture, you know, without even thinking about it. So, but there is a whole, you know, not voyeur, but there's a whole thing where you're exposing your child to other people just constantly viewing them. And it is a very interesting phenomena, to say the least. But I think that absolutely asking children and talking to them about what they feel comfortable sharing is very important.
So if I could make a comment, one thing that really struck me is that many of the things that you're talking about, I wish I'd known back when my kids were in early elementary school. And maybe, you know, my kids are now 17 and 22, but, you know, I love the idea of putting that scaffolding in place really early, from the very earliest stages when your kid gets their first iPad device, whatever it is, that our parents should be hearing about this, you know, in first, second, third grade, you know, and not waiting to find out, you know, in middle school when it's really hard to all of a sudden put those scaffolds in place. And so, you know, part of me wants to, you know, take your message and share it with some of our parents of younger kids.
One of the challenges we have is we're just not a very prevention-oriented society. Unfortunately, the pandemic is a good example of that, right? Like a lot of this could have been prevented with a little forethought, and there were people warning, but we just didn't do anything about it. So a lot of what Joy and I do is kind of this idea of prevention science and how do we measure if prevention is working. And so we think a lot about transitions, and transitions are really powerful times in life. They're times that risk goes up, and we try to catch parents in 4th and 5th grade because they're a little worried. They're starting to get worried about middle school. They've heard some things about middle school, and that's the age group that we're trying to catch. But definitely there's researchers saying exactly what you're saying, that the earlier, the better. And even kids at age 2 and 3, we don't know if media online, having iPads in your hand all the time, is literally wiring the brain differently.
We do know now that it is.
Yeah.
We have emerging evidence that it is wiring our brains differently. So,
I know there's a group out of Harvard that's studying that. And so but we don't know the long-term effects of that, right? Like, we don't know how that's going to change people's brains 10, 20 years down the line. And so, yeah, definitely an important point. And transitions are important, whether that's the transition when, you know, kids are first like coming home, or the transition into school, or the transition into middle school, the transition into high school. Those are times that are important to kind of catch parents, because when change happens, people feel unsettled and they're willing to get support in a different kind of way.
Yeah, I'm a substance use researcher, and so I work to prevent adolescent early initiation of substances and progression of substances. I think that the true preventative window is in the 3rd to 5th grade. But the research trajectory is really tricky because nobody's thinking about substance use at that age. But that's when we can start those prevention messages. And that's when they can start really taking a hold. And then, like Jen was talking about, those transitions into middle school and then transition into high school. If we're trying to prevent substance use in high school, we've already sort of missed our window. It's the same thing with these social relationships, but it's very tricky to get people bought in that early. Like, you talk to a parent of a 3rd grader and they're like, I'm not thinking about substance use.
And we saw that in our focus groups, both with the parents and the school counselors. The parents of younger kids and the school counselors who were in elementary schools kind of were like, yeah, this really isn't an issue.
Yeah, but then the middle school counselors and the high school counselors are like drowning, you know, and so it's like they're begging, you know, like for this to be dealt with sooner, and it makes a lot of sense. As a society, I think if we need people to care about prevention and to advocate for it so we can get funding for it, and so that we can build out the idea here. Jen and I have, like, I think, long-term plans that we hope to develop the program and then age it down. So basically we can show effect and then try to get earlier and earlier to have a bigger impact.
Well, I hope we can play a role in helping to spread that message to the parents a little bit earlier. Providing them with those tools, I think, would make such a big difference later on.
So is that tied to giving our child, when we give our children phones as well? Like usually kids, wouldn't get a phone until usually middle school, because now they're getting to school on their own or what have you. And now, kids are getting phones younger and younger now, I find. And with that comes, I think, more issues that we need to be talking to our kids about, as early as, I think, 4th grade maybe. And that's, I think it's starting to get there now. I don't know if you guys have seen that.
A few years ago, the average was age 10. But ironically, the more parents are into technology themselves, the less likely there are to give their kids the phone. But when people aren't as familiar, then their kids tend to get phones earlier.
And kids with less monitoring get phones earlier because parents view that as a safety tool. So it's the highest risk kids get phones the earliest. So my recommendation in those situations is to think about delaying ownership as long as you can. And then if you need early ownership, delaying the level, right? So do you need a smartphone, or can a flip phone be good enough? Younger kids, they don't care. They just want, a thing. Older kids are like, if I don't have an iPhone 12 Pro Max, like it's no good. But if you can think about it kind of both like in like depth and breadth, like it's like delaying the age onset of phone ownership and delaying the, functionality of the phone, if you will. Both of those things will be preventative. There's a grassroots initiative called Wait Until 8th, which is basically like parents can sign up as groups to commit to saying we'll wait until the 8th grade to have our kids as a cohort, to have our kids own their first smartphone. And the idea is, because of nagging and peer access and things like that, that's the biggest difficulty that parents face, is like, well, 15 other kids in the class have smartphones, so how can I not get my kid a smartphone? But if they sign up as a cohort in the class, then maybe that kind of group approach of recognizing it as a risk would be healthier. The problem is, I don't know how every place works, but at least my experience so far here in Florida is that kids, they don't stay in classes together across grades. So it's not like you can sign up a class and then they're going to follow one another. They switch up classes every year, which makes that kind of initiative a little bit more difficult, but would be like an interesting thing to think about.
So we could raise awareness about it, and we could do it by grade level and not necessarily class, and see how many people actually sign up by grade for, in middle school. That's something to think about for sure. That's a great idea.
They have a website, and they even will support the sign up and everything. And they have lots of data on there and statistics. It's a very fear mongering kind of website, because it's like, here's all the risks. But the hard part, what I found, we used to actually in this talk make that recommendation. And then we learned that most of the parents coming to our talks had already gotten their kids smartphones. And so it was coming off in a way that was negative and not supportive. So more and more families are giving their kids phones at younger ages. The American Academy of Pediatrics had the same problem, where they were setting really clear guidelines on time, and most families just weren't able to stay within those guidelines.
Wow.
So getting back to the early education, those are all things that I think we could be talking to our parents about very early. The kids may not stay in the same cohort, but a lot of the parents do. And they're in the same
friends, yeah.
Right?
So one more question that I had, and this is actually for counselors. So we have it on here. So if a student comes to school and there's a bullying, cyberbullying event that has taken place, can you walk us through what parents, their students should be doing and how they should be reporting this, who is their first line of contact at schools, and then what happens. Just giving parents a guideline and students, like just letting them know who to report to, how to report, and just, you know, it's just like a scenario, so parents and students know what they should be doing. And actually, one thing too, that bullying hotline does go to the school district or in the email, and somebody does answer the email and pick up the phone. There is somebody on the other line, so it does work. We have that on our website as well. And what happens is, like, it goes back to the school, and then they talk about to the school counselors about it. So that's one way if parents don't know that they should be going to counselor administration at the school. But anyways, if you can walk us through that, and what if I had a child that was being cyberbullied, what should I do?
I mean, they do have, yes, of course, the parents are often not aware that there's the online reporting system from the school district side. And I do believe that the administration has to respond within a certain number of hours. But a lot of time, well, basically, any child needs to have a trusted adult on the campus. It doesn't have to be us. It doesn't have to be a counselor. But every child needs a trusted adult on campus. So the best thing in general, the best advice I could give a parent is to make sure that your child has a trusted adult on campus. Ask them who it is specifically. Who would you go to if this and this and this happens? Oftentimes we'll hear about a cyberbullying incident from a teacher. Other times we'll hear about it from another student or the student themselves, of course, the victim. It could be the SRO. It could be an administrator. It really, there is no formula for it, but the kid has to reach out. And if they just talk about it amongst their friends, then it tends to cause more problems. And it tends to be more, not always a violent ending, but I'm saying a lot of things get instigated over social media. And that's where things start to spiral out of control. So if a kid is not reporting immediately to an adult, then we can't stop it.
Right. And I will say that is where I think a lot of our elementary school counselors are doing a really incredible job, whether it's through Safer Smarter Kids or other curriculum where they do have like the trusted adult triangles, where they say, like, who would you go to at home? Who would you go? Who's your trusted adult at school? Who is your trusted adult, you know, that's outside of the home, but it's not at school, and coming up with those people that they can go to when they do have a situation occur. Because yeah, the first step is for a kid to reach out to an adult. And then all of the adults at the school are aware to either go to an administrator or a counselor or a dean, and we as a student support services team can work together to resolve that.
Thank you for that. And I did hear that from someone else. That was like good advice, that to ask your child if they have at least, well, not at least, but three, they could name 3 people at school that they trusted. And that was something that I learned from one of these talks, to ask my child about. So I do appreciate that, because that's something I learned. And it was nice to hear that they could name some, like 3 people that they would go and trust and they respect and feel safe with. So that's something that I think, you know, all of our children should, you know, we should work towards, to get our kids to name 3 people they feel that they trust, especially at middle school, because middle school's it's a really rough time. It's a hard time in middle school. So anyways, I appreciate counselors. I appreciate you, Ms. Monroe, Ms. Ann, so much for being here tonight. We are at that time at 8:30, almost 2 minutes to 8:30. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but I think Lindsay, same here, Pam. Thanks, Lindsay. If nobody else has any questions, we're going to end the talk right now. But I do want to say thank you so much to Dr. Doty and Dr. Gabrielli for their presentations. I thought that was amazing information. And thank you for letting us share that information out, because I do think that parents need and want this information. And we hope to work with you more in the future and learn more about what your findings are in your research. And Miss Anholt and Miss Maverell, thank you so much for being here. We love you and appreciate you so much. And we hope you guys all have a great night, and we will see you soon. Be kind,
Thanks for having
everybody.
us. See ya.
Well,
Thank you. Bye.
bye.